Hey guys, welcome back to another deep dive into the archives of history, where we strip away the Hollywood gloss, turn off the Creedence Clearwater Revival soundtrack, and step directly into the mud, the heat, and the overwhelming complexity of the past. Today, we are beginning a massive five-part journey into a subject that usually gets buried under tactical maps and kill count statistics. We are talking about the Vietnam War, but not the war you see in asterisk, platoon asterisk, or asterisk, full metal jacket asterisk. We aren't talking about the grunts in the bush or the politicians in Washington. We are talking about the lived reality of the culture and society on the ground. We are asking the question, why would you absolutely, positively not want to live through the societal collapse and cultural schizophrenia of South Vietnam during the American intervention? 3. This is part 1. In this installment, we are going to look at the initial shock to the system, the Americanization of an ancient culture, the economic distortion that turned professors into beggars and bartenders into kings, and the erosion of the traditional village structure that had held the Vietnamese identity together for 1,000 years. To understand why living there would have been a psychological nightmare, you first have to understand what was being lost. Imagine a society built almost entirely on the concept of stability, lineage, and a profound connection to the land. For centuries, the Vietnamese way of life was dictated by the rhythm of the rice harvest and the rigid yet comforting hierarchy of Confucianism. In this world, the father was the head of the household, the teacher was revered above the merchant, and the village was an autonomous universe. There is an old Vietnamese saying, "The emperor's rule stops at the village gate." This meant that no matter what chaotic dynasty rose or fell in the imperial capital, the village remained a sanctuary of order. The ancestors were buried in the rice paddies, watching over the living, and your identity was not defined by your individuality, but by your place within this collective web. Now, imagine taking that delicate ancient spiderweb and dropping a 10-ton engine block onto it. That engine block was the arrival of the American war machine. If you were living in Saigon or one of the surrounding provinces in the mid-1960s, the first thing you would notice wasn't the violence of combat. It was the violence of noise and speed. The American presence didn't just bring soldiers. It brought a level of industrialization and kinetic energy that the country physically wasn't built to handle. If you were a local civilian, your sensory world was abruptly hijacked. The air, once filled with the smells of charcoal fires, fish sauce, and damp earth, was suddenly choked with the acrid stench of burning diesel, jet fuel, and exhaust. The soundscape of temple bells and bicycle tires on gravel was obliterated by the roar of deuce-and-a-half trucks, the asterisk, thwup, 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 asterisk of Hueys cutting through the humid air, and the constant grinding of construction equipment building runways, barracks, and fortifications. You wouldn't want to live here because you would be witnessing the immediate, jarring dislocation of your reality. It was a clash of scale. You have to picture the narrow streets of Saigon, designed for cyclos and pedestrians, suddenly clogged with massive American convoys. The sheer size of the Americans themselves was a culture shock. To the average Vietnamese peasant, malnutritioned and slight of build, the American GIs looked like giants. Hulking figures dripping with sweat, carrying technology that seemed alien. This physical disparity created an immediate psychological barrier, a sense of being occupied by a species that didn't just come from another country, but seemingly from another planet. But the real horror for a civilian living in this society wasn't just the noise, it was the dollar economy. This is something history books often gloss over, but if you lived there, it would dictate every waking moment of your life. When the U.S. military arrived, they brought with them a tidal wave of U.S. dollars. The infusion of cash was astronomical compared to the local economy. Suddenly, the economy of South Vietnam wasn't based on production or agriculture. It was based on servicing the American presence. If you were a middle-class Vietnamese, perhaps a school teacher, a civil servant, or a minor intellectual, you watched your world turn upside down. These were the people who, in a Confucian society, were supposed to be respected. But in the wartime economy, the inflation caused by American spending rendered their fixed salaries worthless. A teacher's monthly salary might suddenly be enough to buy only a few days' worth of rice. Meanwhile, the social hierarchy inverted. A bar girl working on Tudo Street, flirting with GIs and hustling drinks, could make more in a night than her father, a government clerk, could make in 6 months. A teenage boy washing cars for Americans or stealing hubcaps to sell on the black market became the breadwinner of the family. Think about the psychological toll that takes on a society. It breeds a deep, festering resentment and a sense of humiliation. If you lived there, you would feel the shame of the older generation. You would see fathers stripping themselves of their dignity, unable to provide for their families, watching their daughters put on miniskirts, a garment considered scandalous and barbaric in traditional Vietnamese culture, to go entertain foreign soldiers. The moral fabric was being torn apart not by bullets, but by the almighty dollar. The black market, or the PX economy, became the real engine of survival. The post exchanges, PX on American bases, were stocked with goods that the average Vietnamese could only dream of. Canned meats, Salem cigarettes, Hershey bars, radios, massive quantities of alcohol, and toiletries. These goods leaked out of the bases through a porous system of corruption and theft, flooding the streets of Saigon. If you wanted to survive, you had to participate in this corruption. You couldn't just be an honest farmer or worker anymore. You had to hustle. You had to trade American cigarettes for medicine. You had to bribe the local police with Johnny Walker Red Label to keep your son from being drafted. The society forced you to compromise your morals just to eat. This leads us to the destruction of the landscape, which precipitated a massive social migration. You wouldn't want to live in Vietnam during this time because you were likely being forced off your land. As the war in the countryside heated up, the U.S. and the South Vietnamese government initiated various strategies, like the Strategic Hamlet program earlier in the conflict, and later the establishment of free fire zones. The goal was to separate the good peasants from the Viet Cong. The reality was the mass uprooting of millions of people. Imagine being told that your village, the place where your umbilical cord is buried, a traditional anchor of the soul to the earth, the place where your ancestors' spirits reside, is now a free fire zone. You have to leave. You are herded into a refugee camp or you drift toward the cities. This created a phenomenon called forced urbanization. Saigon, a city built for perhaps 500,000 people, swelled to hold millions. Living in Saigon during this period meant living in a pressure cooker. The city was bursting at the seams. Shanty towns made of flattened soda cans, cardboard, and scavenged ammunition crates sprang up along the canals and on the outskirts of the city. These slums were hotbeds of disease, crime, and Viet Cong infiltration. If you were living there, you were living in squalor, surrounded by the refuse of the war. The infrastructure collapsed. There was no garbage collection. The power grid failed constantly. The sewers backed up. And amidst this squalor was the bizarre, surreal overlay of American consumerism. You would walk through a slum where children were suffering from skin diseases and malnutrition. And yet, blasting from a radio would be the latest rock and roll hit from the States. You would see beggars drinking Coca-Cola. It was a dystopian cyberpunk reality before the genre even existed. The juxtaposition of extreme poverty and high-tech foreign waste created a surreal atmosphere that made you question reality. Then there was the Honda culture. By the late 60s, the Japanese motorbike brand Honda flooded the market. Suddenly, everyone needed a motorbike to navigate the chaotic sprawl. The bicycle, a symbol of the slow, measured pace of the past, was replaced by the swarm of noisy engines. The streets became a river of exhaust and metal. This mobility changed society, too. It allowed for more crime. Drive-by snatch thefts became an epidemic. But it also broke the family unit further. Young people could leave the house, zip around the city, and disappear into the neon-lit nightlife, escaping the watchful eyes of their parents. The generational divide widened into a chasm. Let's talk about the bar girl phenomenon in more depth, because it is central to the cultural trauma of the era. To the American soldiers, the bar districts were playgrounds, places to blow off steam, drink cheap beer, and find female companionship. But for the Vietnamese society, these districts were open wounds. If you were a Vietnamese man walking past these bars, seeing young Vietnamese women, perhaps your neighbor's daughter or your own cousin, hanging on the arms of large, loud, often intoxicated foreign men, it created a complex cocktail of jealousy, emasculation, and rage. It wasn't just about sex, it was about power. The foreign army occupied not just the land, but the women. This fueled anti-American sentiment, even among those who hated the communists. It made people ask, we are fighting the communists to save our culture, but in the process, we are selling our culture to the Americans. So, what are we actually saving? The presence of the Americans also brought a racial complexity that Vietnamese society wasn't prepared for. The interactions between white and black American soldiers played out on Vietnamese streets, importing American racial tensions into a context that locals didn't understand. But more importantly, the Vietnamese themselves were treated with a casual racism by many, not all but many, of the occupiers. Being called gook, dink, or slope wasn't just battlefield slang, it leaked into the cities. If you were a dignified elder trying to cross the street, and a jeep full of 19-year-old Americans honked at you and shouted slurs, the humiliation was searing. You were a stranger in your own country, a second-class citizen in the land of your ancestors. Furthermore, the intellectual climate was suffocating. If you were a student or an intellectual, you were stuck between a rock and a hard place. The South Vietnamese government was often authoritarian, corrupt, and suspicious of dissent. If you spoke out against the corruption, you were labeled a communist sympathizer and risked torture or imprisonment. But if you supported the communists, you were supporting a system that would strip away your individual freedoms. There was no middle ground. The coffee houses of Saigon were filled with smoke and hushed conversations, paranoia hanging heavy in the air. Who was listening? The secret police? The CIA? The Viet Cong undercover agents? You couldn't trust your friends. You couldn't trust your family. The war destroyed the concept of trust. Let's look at the education system. In a normal society, schools are the incubators of the future. In wartime Vietnam, schools became battlegrounds. The curriculum was constantly in flux, subject to the whims of the current regime. But more practically, the schools were drained of teachers. Men were drafted. Those who remained were underpaid and demoralized. And for the students, what was the point of studying? If you were a male, as soon as you turned 18, you were going to be drafted into the ARVN, Army of the Republic of Vietnam. You were likely going to be sent to the jungle to die. This created a sense of nihilism among the youth. Why learn calculus when you're going to be cannon fodder? This fatalism permeated the youth culture. It led to a live-for-today attitude that fueled the drug trade, the gang violence, and the breakdown of social norms. We also have to talk about the drugs. It wasn't just the GIs doing heroin and smoking marijuana. The drug culture seeped into the Vietnamese cities. The breakdown of social order, combined with the availability of narcotics, often trafficked by corrupt officials in the government, meant that addiction became a scourge in the slums. It was another way to escape the misery of the war, but it further rotted the society from the inside out. But perhaps the most insidious part of living in this society was the low-intensity terror. We often think of war as big battles, but living in South Vietnam meant living with the constant gnawing fear of the random. Oh, a grenade thrown into a movie theater, a bicycle bomb leaning against a cafe wall, a taxi bus hitting a mine on a rural road. There was no front line. The war was everywhere. It was in the market where you bought vegetables. It was in the schoolyard. It was in the temple. This erased the psychological safety of home. When nowhere is safe, the human mind stays in a permanent state of fight or flight. Cortisol levels remain sky high. You become jumpy, aggressive, or completely numb. This numbness is a key factor. People stop reacting to death. If you lived there, you would see bodies, dead Viet Cong displayed as warnings or victims of accidents or casualties of shelling, and you would eventually just walk past them. The sanctity of life, deeply cherished in Buddhist tradition, was eroded by the sheer volume of death. You would have to harden your heart just to get through the day. Compassion became a liability. If you stopped to help someone, you might be caught in a second explosion or accused of being involved. So, you learned to look away. You learned to keep your head down. The communal spirit of the village, where everyone helped everyone, was replaced by a cold urban survivalism. And let's not forget the cowboys. This was the slang term for the street gangs of young Vietnamese men, often riding Honda motorcycles, who ruled the streets of Saigon. They were the children of the war, fatherless, rootless, and angry. They carried switchblades and sometimes guns. They snatched watches, purses, and jewelry. They were the manifestation of a generation that had been raised in violence. If you were a regular citizen, too, the cowboys were as much a threat as the Viet Cong or the secret police. They represented the anarchy that bubbled just beneath the surface of the American-imposed order. The clash of time was also disorienting. Vietnam was a country that operated on a lunar calendar, a cyclical concept of time, where festivals and harvest moons dictated the flow of life. The Americans brought linear time, schedules, deadlines, hours, minutes, seconds. The clash between rubber time, the flexible Vietnamese approach to time, and American punctuality caused endless friction. But deeper than that, it felt like the country was being rushed toward a future it didn't choose. The modernization wasn't organic, it was forced. It was like putting a jet engine on a wooden cart. The cart doesn't just go faster, it disintegrates. Culturally, the loss of the spirit of the land was devastating. In Vietnamese belief, the land is not just soil, it is a living entity. When the Americans used defoliants like Agent Orange, or when they used giant bulldozers called Rome plows to clear thousands of acres of jungle to deny cover to the enemy, they weren't just changing the military tactics. To the local population, they were mutilating the earth. They were killing the spirits of the trees in the mountains. Living in a landscape that was being chemically and mechanically murdered created a spiritual despair that is hard for a Western mindset to fully grasp. It felt like the apocalypse. It felt like the gods had abandoned the country. Even the food changed. And for a culture that centers so heavily on cuisine, this matters. The influx of American goods meant the introduction of processed foods, but also the destruction of the countryside meant that fresh produce became scarce or expensive. The famous fish sauce, Nuoc Mam production, was disrupted. Rice, the staple of life, sometimes had to be imported because the rice bowl of Asia was being bombed into oblivion. Imagine the psychological impact of being a Vietnamese person eating rice imported from Louisiana because your own patties are full of craters. It emphasizes your dependency and your helplessness. In the cities, the architecture of the society was physically partitioned. There were the American zones, air-conditioned, walled off, guarded, bright, and clean. And then there was the Vietnamese reality outside the gates, hot, dusty, dark, and dangerous. This apartheid-like existence reinforced the feeling of being occupied. You could see the American dream right there behind the chain-link fence, but you were living in the nightmare. The Americans had ice cream, television, and cold beer. You had curfews, warm water, and fear. Let's dwell on the curfews for a moment. Imagine living your life where you must be indoors by a certain hour or risk being shot on sight. The night belonged to the war. The vibrant social life of the Vietnamese, which often took place in the cool of the evening, was curtailed. The city at night was a place of flares drifting down from the sky, casting spooky, shifting shadows. The silence was punctuated by distant artillery called H&I, harassment and interdiction fire, which was fired randomly into the countryside to deny the enemy movement. For a civilian, lying in bed, listening to the ground shake every few minutes, sleep was never deep. You lived in a state of semi-consciousness, always one ear open for the siren or the scream. This was the society of the South. It was a society fracturing under the weight of a foreign giant, drowning in foreign money and bleeding from 1,000 cultural cuts. It was a place where the old world was dying, but the new world was a deformed, violent monstrosity. But here's the kicker, and the transition to what we will discuss in the next part. All of this chaos, all of this corruption and noise was happening in the safe zones. This was life in the cities and the government-controlled areas. This was the better life. This was what you had if you were lucky enough not to be in the direct line of fire. If you think the moral decay and the cultural erasure of Saigon was bad, wait until we get to the countryside. Wait until we talk about what happened when the war didn't just distort society, but actively hunted it. In Part 2, we are going to leave the neon lights of the city and head into the villages. We are going to talk about the strategic hamlets, the free fire zones, and the impossible choice between the government by day and the Viet Cong by night. We are going to explore the schizophrenia of survival when your own home becomes the battlefield. So, stick around. We've only just scratched the surface of the heat, the humidity, and the horror. This is why you wouldn't want to live in the Vietnam War, and it only gets darker from here. Asterisk, asterisk. Part 2. The schizophrenia of the soil. Asterisk, asterisk. If Saigon was a fever dream of neon and noise, the countryside is a silence that screams. To understand why you wouldn't want to live in Vietnam during the war, you have to leave the bastardized comfort of the city. You have to leave the bars where the music drowns out the distant artillery and step into the mud. In the West, we often view the war through the lens of the soldier, the grunt hacking through the jungle, the pilot soaring above the canopy. But the soul of Vietnam was not in the barracks or the cockpits. It was in the Lang, the village. 80% of the population lived here. And if you were dropped into this life, your existence would not be defined by ideology, democracy, or communism. It would be defined by the impossible schizophrenic necessity of serving two masters who both wanted to kill you. Asterisk, asterisk. The lie of the pastoral. Asterisk, asterisk. At first glance, the Mekong Delta or the Central Highlands might seem like an escape from the rot of Saigon. The landscape is arrestingly beautiful. It is a world of infinite greens, the electric green of young rice shoots, the deep, mossy green of the jungle tree line, the murky, silt-heavy green of the rivers. The air here smells different. It smells of wet earth, buffalo dung, wood smoke, and rain. It feels timeless, as if the rhythms of planting and harvest have continued uninterrupted for 1,000 years. But this pastoral serenity is the war's most dangerous lie. In the city, the danger is often visible: a clouded face, a barbed wire checkpoint, a drunken brawl. In the countryside, the danger is invisible. It is buried in the mud under your feet. It is hiding in the tree line. It is watching you from the back of a water buffalo. If you were a villager here, your life was inextricably bound to the land. This is a cultural concept that is difficult for a modern, transient Westerner to fully grasp. In Vietnamese culture, the land is not merely an asset or property. It is the physical manifestation of your lineage. Your ancestors are buried in the rice paddies you cultivate. Their spirits inhabit the house you sleep in. To leave your village is to abandon your parents and grandparents to the elements. It is a form of spiritual suicide. You are tethered to this specific patch of mud by a cord that transcends economics. And that tether is exactly what the war used to strangle you. Asterisk, asterisk. The day and night. Dichotomy. Asterisk, asterisk. The defining characteristic of rural life during the war was the temporal split of authority. It was a psychotic way to live. By day, the Republic of Vietnam, the South Vietnamese government, and their American allies theoretically controlled the area. Patrols would sweep through. You would see the Americans, gigantic, sweating men burdened with 60 pounds of gear, smelling of sour milk and insect repellent, their eyes darting nervously at every bush. They looked like aliens on a hostile planet. When they entered your village, you had to perform the role of the loyal citizen. You smiled, you nodded, you showed your ID card, you offered them water or fruit, terrified that if you didn't, they would burn your house, but terrified that if you did asterisk, the neighbors would see. You had to answer their questions. Asterisk, where are the VC? Have you seen men with guns? You knew the answers. Of course you knew. The VC weren't strangers. They were your cousin, your neighbor's son, the school teacher. But you couldn't say that. If you pointed them out, you signed your own death warrant. If you stayed silent, the Americans might decide you were a sympathizer. You learned to master the peasant stare, a mask of dull, incomprehending obedience designed to make the soldiers lose interest and move on. But the day was the easy part. The day belonged to the helicopters and the APCs. The night belonged to them. As the sun dipped below the horizon, the government troops retreated to their fortified outposts and district capitals. The countryside went dark, and then the other government emerged. The Viet Cong, or the National Liberation Front, didn't just hide in the jungle, they permeated the villages. When night fell, they came into your home. They didn't need to shout. They spoke in quiet, terrifying certainties. They held propaganda meetings that you were required to attend. They collected taxes, rice, money, livestock, to feed the revolution. Imagine the psychological toll. At 10 a.m., an ARVN, Army of the Republic of Vietnam, officer beats you for not paying enough government tax. At 10 p.m., a VC cadre threatens to execute you for not contributing enough rice to the cause. You are the meat in the sandwich. You're being ground down by two massive geopolitical millstones. You have no ideology left, only survival. You learn to hide your rice in 3 different places. One stash for the government tax collectors, one stash for the VC tax collectors, and one hidden deep in the earth so your children don't starve. You learn to hang the flag of South Vietnam during the day and bury it at dusk, retrieving the NLF flag for the night meeting. Oh, you become a master of deceit. You lie to the soldiers. You lie to the cadres. You lie to your neighbors. Trust evaporates. In a culture built on community and collective labor, the war injected a poison of paranoia. You couldn't trust the man plowing the field next to you. He might be an informer for the government Or he might be a VC sympathizer who thinks you're too cozy with the Americans. Asterisk, asterisk, the strategic hamlets, a prison by any other name. Asterisk, asterisk. As the war heated up, the government decided that the solution to this day-night problem was to physically separate the people from the insurgents. They called it the Strategic Hamlet Program. If you were living this reality, this was the moment your life shattered. Soldiers arrived at your ancestral village, the place where your umbilical cord was buried, where your ancestors' bones rested. They gave you hours, maybe less, to pack your belongings. Then they set fire to your home. You watched the thatch roof ignite. You watched the family altar consume itself in flames. You were herded, along with hundreds of others, to a new location, a strategic hamlet. The government called them protected communities. To you, they looked like concentration camps. These hamlets were surrounded by moats, earthen walls, and rows of bamboo punji stakes. There was barbed wire everywhere. There were armed guards at the gates. The logic was cold. If the peasants are locked inside a fortress at night, the VC cannot enter to collect taxes or recruits. The water would be drained, leaving the fish, the insurgents, to die. But living inside was a misery. The crowding was intense. Sanitation broke down immediately. You were miles away from your fields, meaning you had to walk for hours just to farm, and you had to be back before the strict curfew. If you were late, the gates were locked. If you were outside after dark, you were considered a target. Inside the hamlet, the social fabric dissolved. Strangers were packed together with strangers. The government appointed hamlet chiefs who were often corrupt, siphoning off the construction materials and aid money meant for the people. And the cruelest irony, it didn't work. The VC were already inside. They were the teenagers building the fences. They were the old women selling vegetables. The walls didn't keep the enemy out. They just locked you in with them. The Strategic Hamlet Program didn't create safety. It created a pressure cooker of resentment. By forcing you off your ancestral land and burning your home, the government had done the Viet Cong's recruitment work for them. You hated the people who put you in this cage. Asterisk, asterisk, the Free Fire Zone. Asterisk, asterisk. If you were unlucky enough to refuse relocation, or if you lived in an area deemed too hostile for a hamlet, you found yourself in a free fire zone. The terminology is clinical, but the reality was apocalyptic. A free fire zone meant that legally and militarily, the rules of engagement were suspended. Any person, animal, or object moving in that zone was considered an enemy combatant. Living here meant living with a target painted on your back every second of every day. You learned to listen to the sky. In the Vietnam War, death usually came from above. The technological asymmetry was terrifying. You were a farmer with a hoe. Your enemy was a phantom jet dropping napalm canisters, tumbling end over end. You learned the different sounds of death. The rhythmic asterisk, wop, wop, wop asterisk of the Hueys meant soldiers were coming or gunships were hunting. The high-pitched scream of a jet meant airstrikes. But the most terrifying sound was the one you didn't hear until it was too late. The artillery. American fire bases were dotted throughout the countryside, and they practiced something called H&I, harassment and interdiction fire. This involved firing artillery shells at random intervals into coordinates where enemy movement was asterisk, suspected asterisk, often at night. Imagine trying to sleep in your hut, hugging your children, knowing that at any second, without warning, a 105 mm high-explosive shell could vaporize your world. There was no siren. There was no logic. It was a game of Russian roulette played by a bored artillery officer 10 miles away. This constant random violence broke people. It created a state of permanent hyper-arousal. You stopped planting crops because the fields were cratered or poisoned by defoliants. You lived in bunkers dug under your floorboards. You cooked only at night to hide the smoke, or you ate cold rice to avoid lighting a fire at all. Asterisk, asterisk, the disintegration of the family. Asterisk, asterisk. Perhaps the deepest tragedy of the rural collapse was what it did to the family unit. Vietnam was a Confucian society. The hierarchy of father to son, of youth to elder, was the bedrock of order. The war took a sledgehammer to this bedrock. The ideological divide didn't just split the country, it split dinner tables. It was common for a family to have one son drafted into the ARVN and another son volunteer for the VC. Imagine the silence at the family meal, the fear that one brother might kill the other, the mother trying to hold the center together while the edges frayed. The war also overturned the hierarchy. In the villages, the elders were traditionally the leaders. They held the wisdom and the moral authority. But the war belonged to the young and the ruthless. A 19-year-old VC cadre with an AK-47 held more power than the village elder. A 20-year-old American lieutenant could order the burning of a house that had stood for 3 generations. The elders were rendered impotent. They could not protect their families. They could not stop the bombs. They could not save the ancestors' graves. Watching their authority crumble caused a deep, collective shame that permeated the culture. The young lost respect for the old because the old could no longer ensure survival. Asterisk, asterisk, the corruption of innocence, asterisk, asterisk. And then there were the children. If you lived in the Vietnamese countryside, you watched your children age a decade in a single year. They ceased to be children. They became runners, spies, scavengers, and victims. You watched them learn to distinguish between bullet calibers by sound. You watched them learn to steal rations from passing convoys. You watched them absorb the hatreds of their parents. In the strategic hamlets, children were often used as pawns. The VC used children to carry messages or even plant grenades, knowing the Americans might hesitate to shoot a child. The Americans and ARVN, in turn, learned to fear the children. There is a specific horror in seeing a soldier point a rifle at a 10-year-old boy because he doesn't know if the boy is holding a mango or a frag grenade. If you were the parent, you lived with the constant terror that your child's curiosity or playfulness would be misinterpreted as aggression. Asterisk, asterisk, the dust of life. Asterisk, asterisk. As the war dragged on, the countryside began to empty. The bombing, the defoliants, the fighting, and the forced relocations created a massive refugee crisis. The farmers drifted toward the cities, creating shantytowns on the outskirts of Saigon and Da Nang. They lost their name, Nha Que, country people. They became Bui Doi, the dust of life. Drifting, rootless, separated from the land that gave them their identity. They were ghosts before they were dead. But let's say you stayed. Let's say you endured the strategic hamlets, the free fire zones, the taxes, and the terror. You survived the crossfire. You kept your head down. Eventually, the war would come for you in a way that wasn't about bullets or bombs. It would come for your body. It would come in the form of a chemical mist drifting down from the plains, settling on your crops, your water, and your skin. We've talked about the decay of the city and the destruction of the village society, but we haven't yet talked about the physical cost. We haven't talked about what happens when the very environment turns against you, when the weapons of war are designed not just to kill, but to maim, to burn, and to mutate. In Part 3, we are going to look at the weapons. We are going to look at napalm, white phosphorus, and Agent Orange. We are going to look at the hospitals and the utter lack of them. We are going to explore what it feels like when the war gets under your skin, literally. You've lost your culture. You've lost your home. Next, you lose your body. The sky has changed. In the Vietnam of the past, the Vietnam of your grandparents, the sky was the domain of the erratic but predictable gods of weather. It was where the monsoon gathered, heavy with the promise of rice, or where the sun blazed, dictating the rhythm of the harvest. The sky was vast, indifferent, and occasionally benevolent. Now, living in the war zones of 1967 or 1969, the sky is a ceiling that is slowly lowering to crush you. It is no longer occupied by clouds and birds. It is occupied by aluminum predators. The noise is constant. It is a low-frequency vibration that rattles the teeth in your skull, the distant thumping of rotor blades that sounds like a heart palpitation, the shrieking tear of jet engines that arrive long after the death they carry has already been released. In the previous chapters, you watched your city crumble under the weight of refugees and corruption. You watched your village dissolve as the intricate web of kinship and ancestor worship was severed by displacement. You lost your social identity. You lost your home. Now you are going to lose your physical self. To understand why you would not want to live through this, you must understand that the Vietnam War was a testing ground for a new generation of industrial slaughter. It was a conflict where chemistry met biology with enthusiastic malice. The weapons dropped on the Vietnamese countryside were not merely designed to kill. Death is simple. Death is binary. These weapons were designed to terrorize, to maim, to strip away cover, and to rewrite the genetic code of the land and the people living on it. Let us begin with the heat. You're working in the paddy, or perhaps you're walking along the dike road, connecting your hamlet to the market. You hear the whine of the F-4 Phantoms. You don't look up. You have learned that looking up doesn't help. You throw yourself into the mud. You hope. The canisters they drop do not look like conventional bombs. They tumble end over end, almost gracefully, flashing silver in the sun. They are filled with a mixture of polystyrene, benzene, and gasoline. It is a jelly. It is napalm. When the canisters hit, they do not merely explode outward with concussive force. They burst into a rolling liquid wave of fire. The chemistry is insidious. The gelling agent causes the burning substance to stick to whatever it touches. If you are caught in the splash radius, you're not just burned, you are coated. Imagine the sensation. It is not like touching a hot stove. It is a viscous, heavy fluid that lands on your arm, your back, or your face, and immediately begins to burn at temperatures exceeding 2,000 degrees Fahrenheit. It burns hot enough to melt aluminum. It burns hot enough to suck the oxygen out of the air for hundreds of yards, causing those not even touched by the flames to asphyxiate in the vacuum. Your instinct is to wipe it off. You slap your hand against the burning jelly on your arm. Now your hand is burning. The jelly transfers. Sticky and relentless, you roll on the ground. The jelly grinds into the dirt but does not extinguish. It only spreads. You jump into the canal. This is the cruelest joke of napalm. It burns underwater. It requires no external oxygen source once ignited. It carries its own oxidizers or burns with such ferocity that water merely boils around it. Living in this society means living with the visual evidence of this weapon. You see the survivors. In the cities and the refugee camps, you encounter the people who did not die. They are the faceless. The scar tissue from napalm does not heal smoothly. It keloids. It twists and tightens as it cures, pulling the skin into grotesque frozen shapes. You see children whose chins are fused to their chests because the scar tissue contracted and pulled the head down. You see eyelids that cannot close because the skin of the forehead has shrunk, leaving the eyes permanently open, dry, and weeping. The social cost of this is catastrophic. In a culture that values physical wholeness, where the body is a gift from the parents and a vessel for the spirit, to be so visibly mutilated is a spiritual crisis. These victims become pariahs, not out of malice, but out of a collective, horrific shame and the inability of the shattered community to care for them. They are the living reminders of the sky's hatred. But napalm is loud. It announces itself. There are other things that are quieter, prettier, and perhaps worse. There is white phosphorus. The soldiers call it Willie Peter. If napalm is the dragon, white phosphorus is the ghost. It is used often for smoke screens or marking targets. But it is also used as an incendiary. When a white phosphorus shell bursts, it creates a beautiful, billowing cloud of pure white smoke, arching out like the tentacles of a jellyfish. It looks almost ethereal against the deep green of the jungle, but inside that white cloud are particles of burning phosphorus. When a particle of this substance hits your skin, it does not just burn on the surface. It is lipophilic. It is attracted to fat. It dissolves into your flesh, burning its way down through the dermis, through the muscle, seeking the bone. The horror of white phosphorus for a civilian living in this war is the impossibility of treatment. You can bandage a cut. You can set a broken bone. But if a piece of Willie Peter is embedded in your child's leg, it will continue to burn as long as it has exposure to oxygen. You can cover it with mud, and it will stop. But the moment you scrape the mud away to treat the wound, the air hits the particle, and it reignites, sizzling back into life inside the wound. It creates a necrotic tunnel in the body. The smoke it emits is toxic. The wound it leaves is poisoned. This is the daily anxiety of the body. It is the knowledge that the environment is laden with things that want to consume you. But weapons that burn are immediate. They happen in a flash of violence. What is psychologically more devastating is the weaponization of the landscape itself. This brings us to the rainbow herbicides, Agents Pink, Green, Purple, White, and the most infamous Agent Orange. In a guerrilla war, the jungle is the enemy's ally. To fight the enemy, the Americans decided to kill the jungle. But you are not a soldier. You are a farmer. The jungle is not tactical cover to you. It is the biosphere. It is the source of wood, of medicine, of shade, and of water regulation. You wake up one morning to the sound of C-123 providers flying low and slow, 3 abreast, spraying a fine, oily mist from nozzles on their wings. It drifts down like a chemical dew. It smells sweet, distinct, unlike anything in nature. The kids run out to look at the plains. They play in the mist. It feels cool on the skin in the tropical heat. A few days later, the world begins to die. First, the leaves curl. The great canopy of the forest turns a sickly yellow, then brown, and then falls away. The mangroves, with their intricate root systems that hold the shoreline together, wither and rot. But it is not just the wild trees. It is your papaya trees. It is your cassava. Oh, it is your rice. The Americans call this Operation Ranch Hand. Their motto is, "Only we can prevent forests." For you, it is the onset of a slow-motion famine. The crops absorb the dioxin, one of the most toxic molecules known to science, and then they die. If you eat the crops before they rot, you ingest the poison. If you drink from the crater ponds or the streams where the runoff flows, you ingest the poison. The physical cost of Agent Orange is not a wound you can stitch. It is a corruption of the cellular machinery. It begins with chloroquine, terrible cystic eruptions on the skin that do not heal. It moves to the liver, the nerves. But the true horror, the one that tears the fabric of Vietnamese society apart, is what happens to the next generation. In a Confucian society, the lineage is everything. The greatest duty you have is to produce healthy offspring, to worship the ancestors, and maintain the family line. Agent Orange attacks this fundamental duty. Women in the villages begin to whisper. They talk of monster births. They talk of babies born without eyes, or with heads swollen like watermelons, or with limbs that are twisted like the roots of the dying mangroves. They give birth to stillborn lumps of flesh that have no human shape. Imagine the psychological terror of pregnancy in this environment. What should be a time of hope becomes a time of agonizing dread. Every pregnant woman looks at the sky, looks at the withered crops, and wonders if the poison has reached her womb. When the child is born deformed, the tragedy is twofold: the suffering of the child and the crushing guilt of the parents who believe, often due to traditional superstition, that they must have committed some terrible sin to be punished by the heavens in this way. The science of dioxin is unknown to them. They only know that their bloodline has been cursed. You have lost your skin to napalm. You have lost your muscles to phosphorus. You have lost your genetic future to herbicides. Now, broken and bleeding, you seek help. This is where the reality of the civilizing mission collapses completely. You're going to a hospital. In the West, or in the modern day, we associate hospitals with sterility, white walls, the smell of antiseptic, and the hushed tones of competence. In South Vietnam during the war, the civilian medical system was a vision of hell. The military hospitals, the American ones, are miracles of modern science. They have helicopters, blood banks, x-rays, and surgeons who can work magic. But you're not allowed there. You are a Vietnamese civilian. You must go to the provincial hospital run by the South Vietnamese government. The first thing that hits you is the smell. It is a solid wall of odor: gangrene, stale urine, unwashed bodies, dried blood, and the sickly sweet rot of infected burns. The facility is overcrowded beyond comprehension. These hospitals were built by the French for a population half the size during a time of peace. Now they are deluged with the casualties of a high-tech war. There are 2, sometimes 3 patients to a single metal cot. Others lie on straw mats in the hallways or simply on the bare, filthy tiles. There are no sheets. If you want a sheet, your family must bring one. There is no food provided. If you want to eat, your family must crouch in the courtyard over a charcoal brazier and cook for you. If you have no family, you starve. The medical supplies are non-existent. Antibiotics are worth their weight in gold and are often stolen by the staff to be sold on the black market to feed their own families. Painkillers are a fantasy. Imagine undergoing the debridement of a napalm burn, where the dead tissue is scrubbed away to prevent infection, without morphine. The screams from the wards echo into the streets. Sterility is impossible. Flies are everywhere. They land on the open abdominal wounds of soldiers and the shattered legs of farmers. In the humidity of the tropics, wounds do not dry. They fester. Maggots are a common sight in the bandages. The doctors and nurses are overwhelmed. Many of the best doctors have been drafted into the Army to treat soldiers, leaving the civilian hospitals understaffed or staffed by those with less training. They work 18-hour shifts, wading through a river of trauma that never ends. They become desensitized. They have to. Triage in this environment is brutal. If you arrive with a severe abdominal wound and the generator has failed, which it often does, and there is no blood for a transfusion, which there rarely is, you are simply placed in the expectant row. This is the polite term for the corner where people are left to die. If you have a limb shattered by a mortar shell, the doctors do not have the time or the resources for complex reconstructive surgery. They cannot spend 10 hours pinning bones and grafting vessels. They have 20 other patients waiting. So they amputate. It is quick. It saves the life usually, but it creates a cripple. And this brings us back to the society. The result of this medical abyss is a population of amputees. In a peasant society, your body is your economic engine. You need 2 hands to plant rice. You need 2 legs to carry the yoke. A man with 1 leg cannot work the paddy. He becomes a mouth to feed, a burden on a family already stretched to the breaking point by inflation and displacement. The streets of the cities become filled with the dust of life. Men who look to be 20 years old, missing an arm or a leg, dragging themselves on wheeled carts, begging for cigarettes or piastres from the American GIs. This is the physical degradation of a people. It is the reduction of a proud, laboring class into a swarm of beggars. But the war gets under your skin in other microscopic ways. It is not just the trauma, it is the disease. The disruption of the ecosystem and the mass movement of people create breeding grounds for plagues. Cholera returns. Bubonic plague, the Black Death, makes a comeback in Vietnam in the late 1960s, carried by the rats that feast on the garbage of the refugee camps and the unburied dead. Malaria, always a threat, becomes a scourge as the bomb craters fill with stagnant water, creating millions of perfect breeding pools for mosquitoes. You are living in a body that is under siege from the outside by steel and fire, and from the inside by bacteria and parasites. You are perpetually exhausted, anemic, and anxious. There is a specific phenomenon that observers noted during the war, the 1,000-yard stare. Usually attributed to combat soldiers, but in Vietnam, it settled over the civilian population too. It is a dissociation. It is what happens when the physical stress becomes so great that the mind simply disconnects from the body to survive. You stop flinching at the bombs. You stop swiping at the flies. You sit in the ruins of your home or on the floor of the crowded hospital, and you simply exist. Your body has become a site of suffering, a cage from which there is no escape. The Americans have a phrase, winning hearts and minds. It is their strategy for victory. They want to convince you that their way of life is superior, that they are there to save you from communism. But look at your body. Look at the keloid scars on your daughter's face. Look at the empty sleeve of your husband's shirt. Look at the rash that won't go away on your own arms. Look at the child in the village born with his brain outside his skull. The weapons of this war have communicated a different message. They have told you that your flesh is soft and their steel is hard. They have told you that your environment, the trees, the water, the air, can be weaponized against you. They have demonstrated that in the eyes of this technological colossus, your physical integrity means nothing. You are not being saved. You are being erased. As the war drags on, the physical deterioration of the population mirrors the deterioration of the land. The forests are stripped bare, leaving mud. The people are stripped of their health, leaving trauma. The relationship between the Vietnamese and their physical world is severed. You can no longer trust the rain, for it might be toxic. You can no longer trust the harvest. You can no longer trust your own body to carry you through the day. And yet, you must survive. You must limp forward. But the person who survives is not the person who was there before. That person burned away in the napalm strike or wasted away in the cholera ward. The person who remains is hardened, scarred, and fundamentally altered. We have seen the death of the culture. We have seen the death of the body, but the war is not done with you yet. There is one final sanctuary to invade. If the body is the vessel, the mind is the pilot. And when the vessel is broken and the world is mad, the pilot begins to lose the map. In part 4, we will move from the physical to the psychological. We will explore the fear that never sleeps, the corruption of morality, and the mental fragmentation of a society living in a permanent state of emergency. We will look at what happens to the human mind when it is forced to normalize the unthinkable. You have lost your home. You have lost your body. Next, you lose your mind. Asterisk, asterisk, part 4, the siege of the mind. Asterisk, asterisk, if the body is the vessel, the mind is the pilot. And when the vessel is broken and the world is mad, the pilot begins to lose the map. You have lost your home. You have lost your body. Now, in the twilight of this long, unending conflict, you begin to lose your mind. This is not the madness of cinematic frenzy. It is not a sudden psychotic break where reality shatters in an instant. The psychological destruction of a society at war is a slow erosion. It is the drip feed of adrenaline that never stops, the cortisol that sours the blood, and the gradual, terrifying realization that the abnormal has become normal. To live in Vietnam during the war is to live in a state of permanent psychological siege. There are no safe zones. There is no rear guard where the mind can unclench. Whether you are in the burning hammocks of the countryside or the neon-lit desperation of Saigon, the war has invaded the space between your ears. ###1, the architecture of anxiety. The first casualty of your sanity is sleep. In a healthy society, sleep is a retreat. It is the time when the guard is lowered. But here, sleep is dangerous. The night belongs to the other side. In the countryside, the Viet Cong, VC, move under the cover of darkness. In the cities, the curfews turn the streets into empty canyons where any sound is a threat. You learn to sleep in a state of hyperarousal. Even in your dreams, your ears are working. You classify sounds instantly. The asterisk, thwup, thwup, thwup asterisk of a Huey is a lullaby compared to the high-pitched whine of a jet fighter. The distant rumble of artillery, the harassment and interdiction fire that Americans shoot randomly into the night to deny the enemy terrain, becomes the rhythm of your breathing. But the silence is worse. When the crickets stop chirping in the rice paddies, your heart hammers against your ribs. It means movement. It means men with rifles are walking through the elephant grass. Are they yours? Are they theirs? It doesn't matter. Both bring death. And if you are a mother, you sleep with one hand on your children and the other on a bag of rice. You have rehearsed the drill 1,000 times. Asterisk, roll off the sleeping mat. Drag the children to the family bunker dug into the dirt floor. Do not scream. Over years, this lack of REM sleep corrodes the cognitive faculties of an entire population. Tempers shorten. Memories fail. The line between waking nightmare and sleeping nightmare blurs. You see hallucinations in the corner of your eye, shadows that look like soldiers, trees that look like claymores. The national mood becomes brittle, like dry tinder waiting for a spark. This is the biology of fear. Your body is flooded with stress hormones for days, months, years. In a normal life, a tiger jumps out, you run, you survive, and your hormones reset. In Vietnam, the tiger is always in the room. The stress response never resets. It cooks the brain. It leads to a collective exhaustion so deep that people stop planning for next week, let alone next year. The concept of future evaporates. There is only asterisk, now asterisk, and asterisk, now asterisk is terrifying. ### the second, the fracture of trust, the war of shadows. If the artillery destroys the landscape, paranoia destroys the community. Vietnamese culture is built on the village unit, a tight-knit web of relationships, lineage, and communal trust. The war weaponizes this. It turns the village against itself. This is the psychological torture of the war without fronts. The enemy is not a uniformed army standing across a field. The enemy is your cousin. The enemy is the tea shop owner. The enemy is the teenager who herds the buffalo. You live in a world of duality. By day, the government troops, Arvin, or the Americans, patrol your village. You must smile. You must show your ID card. You must nod when they talk about democracy and freedom. You offer them water because if you don't, they might burn your house down thinking you are a sympathizer. By night, the VC arrive. They are the sons of the village. They demand rice. They demand taxes. They demand you hide a cache of ammunition under your pigsty. You must nod when they talk about liberation and imperialism. You give them rice because if you don't, they might execute you as a collaborator. You are the rope in a tug-of-war between two giants, and the rope is fraying. This necessitates a fracturing of the self. You develop a public face and a private heart, but eventually you forget which is which. You learn to lie with perfect sincerity. You teach your children to lie. If the tall Americans ask, you saw nothing. If the uncles from the forest ask, you saw nothing. The psychological toll of constant deception is immense. It destroys the social fabric. Who denounced the neighbor to the Phoenix program agents? Who told the VC that the village chief was sleeping in a different house? Was it a grudge? Was it for money? Was it just to survive? Suspicion becomes the default mode of interaction. In Saigon, the cafe conversations are hushed. The secret police are everywhere. A wrong word about the president, a joke about the war effort, and you could disappear into the prisons of Condal. This paranoia seeps into the family. The war is a civil war, and the fault lines run through the dinner table. One son is drafted into the ARVN. The other runs off to the jungle to join the NLF. The father is a Mandarin longing for the old ways. The daughter is a student radical protesting in the streets. The family, the absolute bedrock of Confucian society, is torn apart by ideology. You learn not to ask where your brother has been. You learn to love people you might have to kill, or who might kill you. #3, the erosion of morality, the economy of vice. When the mind cannot handle the terror, it seeks escape. When the future is uncertain, the rules of the present cease to matter. As the war drags on, a profound moral rot sets in. Not because the people are wicked, but because the context of goodness has been obliterated. The influx of American dollars and the desperation of survival create an economy of vice that warps the collective psyche. In the cities, traditional values collide violently with Western hedonism and wartime nihilism. The social hierarchy is upended. A university professor earns pennies, while a bar girl servicing GIs earns a fortune. The intellectual elite are rendered impotent, while black marketeers and smugglers become the new kings. For the average citizen, this creates a sense of profound dissonance and humiliation. To survive, you must compromise. The degradation of women becomes a gaping psychological wound in the culture. Thousands of young women, refugees from the bombed-out countryside, flood the cities. With no skills and families to feed, they turn to the service industry surrounding the foreign bases. It is a survival mechanism, but the shame is corrosive. It creates a generation of men who feel emasculated because they cannot provide, and a generation of women who are looked upon with scorn by the very society they are trying to support. Then there are the drugs. To escape the madness, the mind seeks oblivion. Opium has always been present, but the war brings a flood of heroin and pills. It is not just the American soldiers who are using, it is the cyclo drivers, the students, the soldiers of the South. It is a chemical retreat from a reality that is too painful to face sober. This moral collapse is accompanied by a rise in crime. In a world where B-52s can vaporize a village in seconds, the law against stealing a chicken seems absurd. Grab what you can becomes the motto. The social contract is broken. Why follow the law when the lawmakers are corrupt? Why be honest when the honest die young? You watch your own moral compass spin wildly. You find yourself buying stolen medicine on the black market, medicine that was meant for the poor but was siphoned off by a corrupt official. You hate the official, but you pay him. You become complicit in the corruption just to stay alive. This complicity breeds self-loathing. You hate what you have had to become. #Ivor. The normalization of the unthinkable, psychic numbing. Perhaps the most terrifying stage of psychological destruction is not the fear or the paranoia or the vice. It is the numbness. Psychologists call it psychic numbing. It is the mind's final defense mechanism. When the trauma is too great and too frequent, the emotional fuse blows. You simply stop feeling. In the early days of the war, a dead body in the street was a tragedy. People would gather, cover it, pray, and weep. By 1968, A dead body is an obstacle. You step over it. You check your watch. You worry that the traffic caused by the corpse will make you late for work. You have seen so much death that the human form loses its sanctity. You see a truck full of bodies, limbs tangled like mannequin parts, and you don't vomit. You evaluate them clinically, *VC or ARVN, fresh or old. This desensitization is most tragic in the children. This is the generation of the dust of life. Boy doy. These are the street urchins of war. They do not play tag. They play ambush. They mimic the sounds of mortars. They scavenge through trash heaps for shell casings to sell as scrap metal. You watch a group of 10-year-olds standing near a blast site. They're not crying. They're curious. They poke at the debris with sticks. They have no concept of a world without violence. For them, peace is the fairy tale. War is the only reality they have ever known. As an adult, you realize you have lost the ability to mourn. There are too many funerals. If you cried for everyone, you would die of dehydration. So you save your tears for your immediate bloodline and for everyone else. You offer a blank stare. This dead-eye look becomes the standard expression of the populace. It is a mask of indifference worn to protect the soul from being shredded. But this numbness comes at a cost. When you kill your capacity for sorrow, you also kill your capacity for joy. You cannot selectively numb emotions. The world becomes gray. Laughter becomes hollow. Love becomes a desperate clutching thing, devoid of lightness. You are alive, but you are a ghost walking. ###V. Spiritual fragmentation. The haunting. Vietnam is a culture where the boundary between the living and the dead is porous. Ancestor worship is not just a ritual, it is the foundation of existence. You believe that the soul requires a proper burial at home with the correct rites to find peace. The war creates a spiritual crisis of apocalyptic proportions. Hundreds of thousands of people die bad deaths. They are blown apart in rice paddies, buried in mass graves, or lost in the deep jungle. Their bodies are never recovered. Their names are missing from the family altars. In the psychological landscape of the Vietnamese, this means the land is filling up with wandering souls. Kohorn. These are hungry, angry ghosts who have no home to return to. This is not a metaphor for you. This is a literal, terrifying reality. You live in a haunted country. Every patch of jungle, every bomb crater, every street corner is potentially occupied by the restless dead. The psychological burden of this is heavy. You are not just surviving the crossfire of the living. You are navigating the anger of the dead. Mothers go to mediums and fortune tellers, desperate for contact with missing sons. The spiritual marketplace booms. It is a collective cry for closure in a war that offers none. This spiritual trauma creates a sense of cosmic wrongness. The natural order, where children bury parents and the dead rest in the earth, has been inverted. The parents bury the children and the dead walk the earth. It creates a deep existential melancholy, a feeling that the heavens have turned their back on Vietnam. ### the sixth, the breaking point. Eventually, for some, the pilot loses control completely. The mental asylums, like the one at Bien Hoa, overflow. But these are medieval places, warehouses for the broken. Most of the madness is kept at home, behind closed doors. You see it in the woman who sets a place at the table for a husband who died 5 years ago and speaks to the empty chair. You see it in the soldier who sits by the road, shaking uncontrollably, even though the sky is clear. You see it in the quiet dissociation of the student who stops speaking entirely, retreating into a catatonic fortress where the bombs can't hurt him. The society itself becomes schizophrenic. It tries to maintain the rituals of daily life, markets, school, weddings, while the sky falls. You attend a wedding while the windows rattle from airstrikes. You pretend to study math while wondering if the school roof will hold. This cognitive dissonance creates a mental fragmentation. You're doing the motions of life, but your mind is screaming. Asterisk, asterisk, asterisk. By part 4, you understand that the tragedy of the Vietnam War was not just the physical destruction of a country. It was the systematic dismantling of the human psyche. You have survived the hunger, you have survived the shrapnel, you have survived the loss of your home. But as you look in the mirror into your own deadened eyes, you realize the war has taken something that cannot be rebuilt with bricks or rice. It has taken your trust. It has taken your innocence. It has taken your peace of mind. You are still breathing. But the person you were before the first bomb fell, that person is dead. And yet, the war is not over. The guns will eventually fall silent, but silence brings its own horror. The Americans will leave, the regime will fall, and you will be left with the wreckage. In the final part, we will explore the aftermath. We will look at what happens when the adrenaline fades and you are left alone with the ghosts. We will examine the legacy of this trauma, the re-education camps, the exodus of the boat people, and the long, painful silence that follows the noise. You have lost your mind. Now, you must lose your country. End of part 4. Asterisk, 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 asterisk. Part 5. The silence, the salt, and the exile. Asterisk, asterisk. The end of the world does not sound like an explosion. It does not sound like the scream of a jet engine or the crump of artillery, sounds you have grown so accustomed to that they function as the rhythm of your heartbeat. The end of the world sounds like a gate crashing down. And then it sounds like absolute suffocating silence. It is April 30th, 1975. It is noon. The sun is high and blistering over Saigon, a city that is holding its breath. For weeks, the perimeter has been shrinking. You have watched the red pins on the maps move closer, swallowing provinces, swallowing cities, swallowing the only geography you have ever known. Da Nang is gone, Hue is gone, and now the tanks, T-54S, Soviet-made, grinding the asphalt into dust, are rolling through the gates of the Independence Palace. You're standing on a street corner you have walked 1,000 times. The noodle stall where you bought breakfast is overturned. The papers blow in the wind. Identity cards, military dossiers, family photos, the confetti of a collapsing society. You look at the soldiers of the Army of the Republic of Vietnam, ARVN. These were the men who were supposed to hold the line. Now, you watch them stripping. They are tearing off their fatigues, their boots, their insignias. They are standing in their underwear in the middle of the street, frantic, desperate to shed the skin of the loser. A pile of discarded uniforms grows in the gutter, a burial mound of fabric. They are trying to become invisible. You want to do the same. You want to peel off your history, your memories, your affiliations, your very name. But you cannot. You are civilian flesh in a conquered city. The Americans are gone. You watched the helicopters lift off from the rooftops yesterday, looking like heavy metal insects bloated with the lucky few. You saw the people clinging to the skids, falling to their deaths on the concrete below. You saw the desperation in the eyes of fathers passing their babies over barbed wire walls at the embassy, begging for the child to be taken, even if the father could not go. But the rotors have faded. The sky is empty. The noise of the war, the chaotic, violent, deafening noise, stops. In its place comes the voice of the loudspeaker. It crackles to life, echoing off the colonial facades of the buildings. It announces the liberation. It announces the new order. It tells you that the city is no longer Saigon. The war of bullets is over. The war for your soul has just begun. Asterisk, 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 asterisk. The erasure of the self. Asterisk, asterisk. In the weeks that follow, you learn that survival in peace is more complex than survival in war. In war, you only had to dodge death. In this new peace, you must dodge yourself. The culture you lived in is being dismantled brick by conceptual brick. It starts with the books. The new cadres, young men in pith helmets and rubber sandals who look at your city with a mix of awe and contempt, begin the purification. They go into the libraries, the bookstores, the private homes. They drag out the literature, the poetry, the philosophy, the romance novels. Anything labeled decadent, anything Western, anything that speaks of the old regime. They pile them in the streets. You watch the bonfires. You smell the ink burning. It is a distinctive smell, acrid and thick. You watch a copy of a book you once loved, perhaps a translation of Camus or a collection of pre-war poetry about the beauty of the Mekong, curl and ash. They are burning your memories. Then comes the music. The yellow music, the sentimental, melancholic songs of love and loss that define the South, is banned. To be caught listening to a cassette of Kan Lee singing Trin Kong Sun is to be labeled a reactionary. You must hide your music like contraband. In its place, the loudspeakers blast revolutionary marches, songs of collective glory and labor. They play from dawn until dusk. There is no silence anymore, only the mandated noise of the state. Your social circle evaporates. You walk down the street and you see a neighbor you have known for 20 years. You do not make eye contact. You do not stop to chat. You do not know who is watching, who is reporting. The Tudanfo, the neighborhood residential groups, monitor everything. If you have extra rice, why? If you have a visitor, who? If you looked sad during the victory parade, why? Trust, the commodity the war eroded, it is now completely bankrupt. Children are encouraged to report their parents for ideological impurities. You stop speaking freely in your own kitchen. You whisper. You develop a second face, a mask of compliance that you wear the moment you step out of bed. You are still alive, yes. But the you who enjoyed a coffee on the veranda, who debated politics, who dreamed of a career, that person has been erased. Asterisk, 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 asterisk. The camp, asterisk, asterisk. Then comes the letter, or perhaps it's a loudspeaker announcement. All former officers, civil servants, teachers, intellectuals, and those associated with the old government must report for re-education. They tell you to bring food and clothing for 10 days to a month. It is a light sentence, they say. Just a period to learn the ways of the new revolution, to cleanse your mind of the old ideologies. You pack your bag. You hug your family. You tell them you will be back in a few weeks. You believe it because you have to believe it. You are wrong. The trucks take you out of the city, away from the familiar streets, into the deep jungle. The 10 days turn into months. The months turn into years. This is the re-education camp, Hoktap Kai Tao. It is not a prison with bars. The jungle itself is the cage. If you run, the malaria will kill you, or the tigers, or the mines left over from the war. Your life becomes a cycle of breaking rocks, clearing minefields with bamboo sticks, and starvation. The daily ration is a bowl of cassava or sorghum, sometimes mixed with sand. You catch rats to eat. You eat crickets. You eat lizards. You look at your arms and see the bones pressing against the skin. You're becoming a skeleton, a ghost haunting your own body. But the physical labor is the easy part. The horror is the lesson. Every night, after 12 hours of hard labor, you must sit in self-criticism sessions. You must write your biography, not once, but hundreds of times. You must detail every sin, every association with the puppet regime, every crime against the people. You write, asterisk. I was a teacher. I taught math. They return the paper. Asterisk incorrect. You poison the minds of the youth with capitalist logic. Write it again. You write, asterisk. I was a clerk. I filed papers. They return it. Asterisk incorrect. You were a cog in the imperialist machine. Confess your hatred for the revolution. Write it again. If your story changes by a single detail from the version you wrote 3 months ago, you're punished. Yeah, you are put in the Connex, metal shipping containers left by the Americans baking in the sun, or you're put in the tiger cages, bamboo boxes too small to stand or lie down in. You learn to lie. You learn to invent sins you never committed just to satisfy the interrogator. You learn to betray the man sitting next to you. If you report that he has hidden a stash of salt, you might get an extra spoon of rice. Hunger makes monsters of us all. You watch men die. They die of dysentery, shitting their life out in the mud. They die of malaria, shivering so hard their teeth crack. They die of despair, simply refusing to wake up. You envy them. Asterisk, 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 the ghost city asterisk, asterisk. If you are lucky, or perhaps unlucky, you are eventually released. Maybe it has been 3 years, maybe 7. You return to the city. It is unrecognizable. Saigon is now Ho Chi Minh City. The vibrancy is gone. The neon lights are dark. The paint on the buildings is peeling, covered in moss and soot. The economy has collapsed under the weight of sudden forced collectivization. There is no commerce, only the black market. The currency has been changed multiple times, wiping out whatever savings your family had managed to hide. Your house is no longer your house. It has been partitioned, and 2 other families live in your living room. You are a second-class citizen. Because of your time in the camp, your bad background, Lily Chow, you cannot get a job. Your children cannot go to university. You are the lowest caste in the new society. You are sent to the new economic zones, Kin Timor. These are patches of barren land, often former battlefields riddled with unexploded ordnance, where the government dumps the unwanted population to farm. They give you a hoe and a tarp and tell you to build a village. Nothing grows there but misery. You look at your children. They are thin, their bellies distended from malnutrition. They have no future here. They will inherit your sins. They will be punished for who you were. And this is the moment the final realization breaks you. Asterisk. There is no future here. The land you fought for, the land you loved, the land of your ancestors, it has rejected you. It is spitting you out. You have survived the bombs. You have survived the camps, but you cannot survive the hopelessness. You must leave. Asterisk, 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 asterisk. The Black Ocean. Asterisk, asterisk. The decision is madness. To leave means to become a criminal. To leave means to risk death by storm, by starvation, by piracy. The odds of survival are perhaps 50/50ths. But 50% is better than 0%. You sell everything. The last piece of gold hidden in the doorframe, the wedding ring, you pay the snakeheads, the smugglers. It is the dead of night. You creep through the mangroves, mud up to your waist, holding your breath. A baby cries. A hand clamps over its mouth, terrified that the sound will bring the patrol boats and their machine guns. You see the boat. It is a fishing trawler built for 20 men. There are 200 people waiting to board. You are packed into the hold like cargo. There is no room to move. You sit with your knees against your chest, pressed against strangers. The smell is instantaneous. Diesel fumes, sweat, urine, vomit. The engine sputters to life. You slip out into the South China Sea. For the first 2 days, there is hope. But on the 3rd day, the engine dies. Or the storm comes. The waves are mountains of black water. The boat, rotting and overloaded, groans under the assault. Water pours in. You bail with anything you have, hands, bowls, hats. You scream prayers that no one hears. You watch the ocean swallow the boat next to yours. 1 minute it is there, bobbing in the gray mist. The next, it is gone, leaving only debris and bobbing heads that quickly vanish. Then comes the thirst. The water runs out. The sun beats down on the open deck, baking the wood, turning the hold into an oven. Your tongue swells in your mouth. You cannot swallow, People begin to drink seawater, hallucination follows, then madness, then death. You watch a mother try to nurse her child, but she has no milk, only dry heaving. The child goes quiet. The body is wrapped in cloth and slid overboard. There is no ceremony. There is no energy for grief. But the true horror, the thing that will wake you up screaming for the rest of your life, is the pirates. Thai pirates roam these waters looking for the boat people. They know you carry gold. They know you are defenseless. They ram your boat. They board with machetes and hammers. They strip you of everything, the watches, the hidden gold, the last dignity you possess. But they want more than gold. They drag the women onto their ship. You watch. You are held at gunpoint, forced to watch your wife, your daughter, your sister being dragged away. The screams mix with the sound of the waves. Some women throw themselves into the ocean rather than be taken. Some are thrown back later, broken and bleeding. Some are never seen again. You, the man who survived the Tet Offensive, who survived the jungle camps. Whoa, who survived the hunger. You sit there impotent. You cannot fight. You cannot save them. You are reduced to nothing. If you are one of the lucky ones, a commercial freighter spots you, a Norwegian ship or American or French. They lower the nets. You climb up, your legs too weak to hold you. You collapse on the steel deck. You're safe. But as you look back at the dark water, you realize the truth. You have left Vietnam, but you have not arrived anywhere. You are floating in the void. Asterisk, 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 the legacy of Ash, asterisk, asterisk. You land in a camp in Malaysia or the Philippines or Hong Kong. You live behind barbed wire again, sometimes for years, waiting for a country to accept you. Eventually, you step off a plane in a new world, Montreal, California, Melbourne, Paris. The air is cold. The sky is a color you do not recognize. The people speak in rapid, harsh tongues. Snow falls, a white powder that burns your tropical skin. You're safe. You have a job washing dishes or sweeping floors or assembly line work. You work 16 hours a day. You send money back to the family left behind. You buy rice and medicine to be shipped to the address that used to be your home. You are alive. You have succeeded. But look in the mirror. Who is looking back? The culture you came from is gone. The society you understood is gone. Your children grow up speaking English or French. They roll their eyes when you try to tell them about the perfumed river or the taste of taffy sweater on a rainy Saigon morning. They do not understand the shadow that darkens your face when a balloon pops, or why you hoard food in the pantry. They are Americans or Canadians or Australians. They are not you. You sit in your quiet living room in the suburbs. It is peaceful. There are no bombs. There are no secret police. But the silence is loud. In the silence, you hear the helicopters. In the silence, you feel the bamboo cane of the camp guard. In the silence, you smell the salt of the ocean and the diesel fumes. You realize that while the war ended in 1975 for the history books, it never ended for you. It lives in your nervous system. It lives in the way you scan a room for exits. It lives in the way you cannot trust happiness because you know how quickly it can be snatched away. Why would you not want to live in the Vietnam War? Because the war does not just kill your body. If you are unlucky enough to survive, it kills your past. It severs the root that connects you to the earth. It turns you into a seed cast upon the wind, forced to grow in foreign soil, forever looking back at a garden that has been burned to the ground. You have lost your innocence. You have lost your mind. You have lost your country. And in the end, you are left with only the story, a story of blood and ash that you carry like a stone in your chest, a story you try to tell, but one that no one who wasn't there can ever truly understand. You are the survivor, and that is the heaviest burden of all.